Hey guys, Woodruff here. I know for some of you that are at my previous school, you're probably surprised to see this video and like, man, I thought she was done, but it's hard to keep me away. I still am not like I don't love making videos and things like that, but I do love student success and I do love seeing you guys thrive. So I will be making videos now and again to keep this thing going so that you guys can use these resources until at least until the information becomes outdated. So for those that don't know, I did transition into a new role recently. It still has an education component, but it's not at a school of nursing. So you might see some different content on here. I'm going into a new position related to trauma and taking care of trauma patients. So you might start to see some more trauma stuff, which might not be much in nursing school, but maybe one day you can use it in the future if you start to become a trauma junkie like I soon imagine myself I'll be. But anyway, back to business. Oh, and I did since I left the school that I was working at, I do have a new email and stuff like that. I've posted that information up in a banner just so you have it if you need anything. Just know that regardless of where I'm working, my heart is always with you, and I know you can be successful. So that is a good transition into what we're going to talk about today, which is being successful in nursing school. So this is a hot topic, and there's so much stuff out there, and people ask all the time, like, what's the one thing like that could make all the difference if you had to give one tip? And that's a really hard thing to do because in reality, there's not one thing that can lead to success. This is a good transition to my first slide. So there's not one thing that is going to make or break a student. It's sometimes a lot of little things, and every student is different. So I can't go to every student and say, here's what you need to do. I need to talk to them and really see there's a few considerations that I really look at that I think are closely tied to student success. So the point of this video, because I have other videos about test taking strategies, how to read the textbook, things like that. The point of this video is going to be to focus on overall, like if you're struggling in nursing school, if you're not doing well, if you're, feel like you're doing everything you can, but it's still not reaping results, this might be a good video to watch to see like, okay, well, what maybe am I missing? Or what could I do differently or more? Or sometimes the answer is, what can I do less? The answer 9 times out of 10, if you're struggling, is not, hey, you need to study more. Now, sometimes it is. Sometimes people just literally are not studying enough. But there's not. It's not usually just a result of that. Usually, there's other things to consider. There's not one magical resource. So there's some students who told me that they passed nursing school just because of me, and it's not my resources that helped them to pass. They had to do other stuff. There is an occasional magical unicorn student that can hear something or read a textbook and it works. But for 99.99999% of most people that are not magical unicorns, they need multiple resources, and they have to look at the things that I'm about to talk about, all these considerations, really think about what they're doing to set themselves up to study. So this presentation is going to be broken up into how do you set up a good solid study schedule? What methods of study might be helpful to you, and how should you set that up? And then there's a little bit about test taking strategies. I have a whole other video about that. So, but I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. So in other words, I'm saying if you're having difficulty in nursing school, you need to consider these 3 things. Now, of course, there's always other things, other factors, but this is a good way to start breaking them down. What's my study schedule? How am I studying? And how am I doing when I'm taking tests? So let's talk about study schedule. Some questions you might want to ask yourself if you think that this might be a problem for you, or even just to see, hey, could this be a problem, is, are you making time in your schedule for studying? So there's that question, like, am I studying enough? And this can be a hard one because sometimes some people I've talked to when I've done test counselings and things like that, and they're studying like 3 or 4 hours a week. And honestly, that's not going to cut it for most nursing school programs. Everyone's a little different, but most of the time, just a couple hours a week is not enough. And I've also seen people that are spending every waking moment doing it and they're still struggling. So you do want to make sure we're making enough time in our schedule, but we'll talk more about how to not overload yourself. So like the next question is my study time spread throughout the week? And this is an important one because like I was just talking about, sometimes people, they maybe only have one day off a week. So they're like, this is my study day. That's the only day during the week that they study. And it's really hard to retain stuff. Like everything in nursing, it's like you use it or you lose it. And so like, for example, if I'm at a hospital and I'm putting in IVs every day, I'm going to get pretty good at putting in IVs. But if I don't put an IV in for a while, it's not that I'm bad at putting in IVs, but I'm not up to date. I'm not disciplined or practiced in it. And the same goes for studying. So if you're studying for something just once a week, then a lot of times it can negatively affect your ability to retain the information because you're not like reinforcing it all the time. So I almost say like, it's kind of like what they say, like 5 small meals a day. You don't have to have 5 small study sessions a day, even though that actually sounds pretty good. It's the same thing with studying, that at least a little bit each day, even if it's just 1 or 2 practice questions, is something to keep you in that work. Where are you studying? Because we're going to talk about this, a little. I have a whole slide, I think, talking about it. I'm going to talk about it in a little bit. Is that you want to think about, are you studying somewhere there's a lot of distractions? So especially like during COVID, a lot of students struggle with this because they were stuck at home. I'm someone who, when I was working full-time as a faculty member, I really struggled to find a good workplace. I found if I was at home, I was distracted by like, I need to clean, I need to cook, I need to do whatever, fix something up in the house, or it was just too close to the couch where I could, lay down and take a nap. So sometimes it was like being at home wasn't effective, but I found if I was in my office, it didn't have windows and I just kind of felt closed in. I found for me going to a like coffee shop, stuff like Starbucks. I love going to Panera is a good place because I always look at what is their seating, what's their plug situation. And I would put headphones in because I don't want all the noise, but it was like, I did better for me, and everyone's different. I did better for me if I was in a place that I could have some noise and like people are moving and doing things, but they're not distracting me. I found that very helpful. But, for other people, it might be, I need a quiet space. Maybe it is, I need to work from home. Maybe it is, I need to get a quiet space in the library, something like that. And then, yes, I still have my cats. So yes, you'll still hear them meowing. And then another question you might want to ask yourself, am I studying for too long consecutively? So it's not even just about like, hey, are you just studying one day throughout the week? When you are studying, like even let's say you're studying a few days a week, are you studying like for like 8 hours straight? Oh, sorry. Are you studying for 8 hours straight? And 1 second. Are you pretty much studying so long that eventually like stuff starts falling out of your head? Like let's say you're like, right now I'm trying to study for my new job and I'm reading a lot of stuff about trauma patients, I'm listening to podcasts, but I'm trying to do a little bit at a time, because if I try to study too much in one day, like I'm going to be losing stuff. It seems like, oh my God, I've got to cram this stuff in. Or the more, like if I'm looking at it for a long period of time, longer is not more effective. Kind of like, like if you do a workout, after you work out for so many hours, eventually your muscles are just, it's not even working the way that they're supposed to. It's too much. And so, I've seen this with students, like, especially because when I taught theory, we had these really long lectures and people tended to remember stuff from like near the beginning, sometimes in the middle, but as the class went on, it was like, they were just like, it's too much information. So you definitely want to break up, even if you are studying throughout the day, or if you're studying every day, smaller study sessions tend to do better. I might have already done these, but here's my recommendations. Oh yeah, so something that really, this is what I used to do with students. Students would come to me and they were like, well, I don't know if my study schedule is good. So I actually would have them get a piece of paper and write down like Sunday through Saturday and write down everything in their schedule. I'm not just talking about, oh, I have work this day and I have something else this day. Hold on 1 second. My meows and cat. Let's see if I can pause this for a second. Sorry about that, but it wouldn't be one of my videos if there wasn't some sort of chaos. So anyway, so I was talking about like you're going to sit down and you're going to write out your schedule. You want to include everything. So I don't mean every time you go to the bathroom, whatever, but I'm talking about, is there family time? Is there a TV show that you watch every week with your family? Church, if you're a church goer, you know, like anything that you have kind of every week, like you have family dinner or something like that. You want to include everything that you do, not just the basics like work and school. You want to have all those other times. When do you wake up? When do you go to sleep? And then I think it really helps to visualize it and put it all down and then see where your study times are. This also helps to see where you could fit in study time. So I do this with students and I'll look at it and see little things. Now I know sometimes like I'll talk to students and they'll be like, this is a time I don't want to, you know, put anything in. Like, you know, or some people are like, hey, at a certain time of the night, I can't do anything. Okay, I hear you. But sometimes even if it's just listening to 10-minute video, doing 4 or 5 practice questions, something like that before bed, if it's a day that you haven't done any other studying, sometimes like, because sometimes people do those 12-hour shifts like 7 to 7. I think sometimes even if it's like on your way home listening to a video or podcast, things like that, that I think it could be super helpful. And yeah, when you're looking at this, just finding other times too. And I'm going to talk more about it later, but like, you know, fitting in times if you're like a busy person who has kids or has to stay at home with your kids and it's hard to find times. I'll talk a little bit more later about like how to fit it in, but it's really looking at your opportunities to schedule things better. And sometimes it's looking at your schedule and saying, you know what, there is like I'm, you know, like some people look at their schedule and it's like, I'm working too much. And I always tell people like, you know, it's as hard as it is in nursing school, like work what you have to, because I had to work full time in order to support myself financially when I was in nursing school. But if you can work less, then work less, especially during test weeks, things like that. So it's just good to kind of, you know, write things out and kind of see like, what is the, what do you call it? What's the room for improvement? When I'm talking about working too much, you know, like some people do have to work full time, but some people work full time, 2 jobs, or they are doing a lot of overtime. I've known some people to work 6 or 7 days per week. So it can just be too much to like, it's just inconsistent with being able to be successful with nursing school. It can be hard. Yes, the other cat's here now. So much fun, it's a little time. Anyway, so just take a look at it and write it out and try to see where you could find some gaps or rooms. And like sometimes it's hard to see how much you're studying until you actually put it all on paper. And I do recommend when you put it out on paper, also if you have like dedicated study time, like let's say you're in multiple classes, like put this is the day I'm studying for med surg, this is the day I'm studying for psych or something like that. And so that way you kind of have it out and then you can see more reasonably like, is it well spread out or not? So then the other recommendations I have here are the shorter study sessions throughout the day or the week are usually more beneficial. So like I said, kind of breaking it up as if you remember the 5 small meals a day for a lot of disorders, it helps to think of it this way, is that you want to give yourself small tidbits throughout the day, kind of always keep it fresh in your mind without overwhelming yourself. And then, like I said, find study spaces that work with your brain and learning study. I meant learning style is probably what I meant to put here. Hey, look, a typo. I'm still doing typos. I guess that I'm remaining still me no matter where I go. But yeah, so finding a study space that works well with you. And I'm really thinking about and trying different things. I had to try different things. Like for a while, I was not working well at home. So I started working in my office and my office worked well for a while, but then it stopped working well and I was not being productive. So then I found, you know, the study spaces and I thought I have to vary them. I didn't do like, I never found one that I was like, I want to come here every single day. So I went to different places every day and found different places to study. So you might have to try out different things. And sometimes it might surprise you because I thought I needed like a quiet space where I could be by myself, but sometimes that was when I was least productive. Let's try this again. Change. Okay, there we go. So let's talk about some potential problems that can come up. So first, I have kids. So like, and I do have kids, but I'm just saying, like, let's say that you're saying, hey, I have kids. I don't have time for this, or like what you're bringing up. So I definitely understand. I've worked with a lot of students who had young babies, newborns, multiple kids, kids with special needs. And, as a mom who has a kid with special needs, I get it. It's so hard. I never had to do it in nursing school, so I can only imagine. But what I would say is trying to either incorporate them in your study. So things like trying to teach them, even though they know they can't like reiterate it, but just using them as like a sounding board. Especially if they're older, they, if they're young, you can do it at any age, but like if they're older, they could actually quiz you on things. But if they're young, you can just talk to them as a sounding board. Because I talk all the time about how helpful it is to teach other people things for learning. And then the other things to consider with kids is that like obviously nap time is going to be time you want to do stuff that you really need to focus on. So that might be more like assignments and stuff like that. So actual studying is kind of incorporating what do you call them? It's trying to learn their routine the best that you can, and being okay. Like I think the hardest thing, and I think I hear all the time people say is that they're so scared to like they feel like they're neglecting their kids. And what I always tell people to remember is that they are going to see you walk across that stage soon. It's going to be worth it. And like as hard as it is, sometimes when it comes to nursing school, you have to sacrifice a little bit of that time in order to get through this. And this is true for any degree. Like there's very few degrees where you can keep a good work-life balance. So part of going to school and having kids is accepting, hey, for this short period of time, I might not be able to make every event, be with them every night, get quality time with them every day. There's going to be some, I'm going to have to ask for more help. And that's the other suggestion I would have is that if you have opportunities for free or very cheap or affordable childcare, don't be afraid to use it. You don't have to use it every day. There's a balance. That's why I think writing out that schedule helps. And I think you should always incorporate in that schedule some time for you and your family, even if you don't have kids, even if you just have a family that's you're very close with. It's the same thing where, you want to incorporate, at least one day a week where there's some time there. I'm not saying a whole day, but like it'd be great if you can do that. It's just really hard with school and if you work too. But yeah, so you really just want to look at incorporating some time, but also maybe, just asking for some acceptance within yourself with like where you're at, and that, long-term that you're doing this for them and that you're going to be setting them up for success. So when, with the kids thing, it's hard, it's emotional, but what I always tell students to do is imagine them just clapping, cheering, getting so excited seeing you walk across that stage. Every time you're feeling down, feeling like you're not enough, just remember that. The other thing I hear sometimes is I do not have privacy for studying. And if you don't have privacy for studying, what I would recommend with that, like let's say that you're in a household where you just like, you never left alone. I know some students who have families that like, hey, if you're home, then you're available to help them. And that can be kind of tough. And so I think it's definitely having patient loving conversations with your family about expectations and stuff like that can help depending on your family. But some family, and for cultural reasons, some people may like, it doesn't matter. Like you're home, you're here to help us. If you're living in this house, you're here to help. So, sometimes it's again about maybe getting out and finding some other place to study, whether it's another student's house, the library. Like I said, I love coffee shops, Panera, like little sandwich shops, stuff like that. They usually have free Wi-Fi, good tables, good plugs. But you might have other places in your area that would be a little bit more conducive to. Most schools have places to study as well, but I know sometimes they're few and far between or not always the best. So it's definitely finding some place to study and also being okay. Like I said, sometimes that separation, it's hard, or feeling like, oh, I should be at home. But a lot of times you need to do whatever's going to help to facilitate your learning. And know that, utilize those breaks when you're on school breaks and you're able to give all of yourself to your family, your kids, do that. This one I hear a lot. I work full time, have a very busy schedule. So this is hard. So this is where I said you need to get creative and fit in little times. So some great times that you can fit in studying are going to be in the car, listening, like to and from. Now I know that a lot of times you're like, no, I want to listen to music. I get it. But even sometimes if you're like, hey, I'm not really fully paying attention, I want to take notes, listening, believe it or not, can do so much. Even if you feel like you're not learning, you're hearing some stuff, little stuff is going to stick. Some people even do it when they're at the gym working out. Now, for me, that's a deal breaker because I cannot work out without music. I would die. And I don't think I could focus on it, but some people love to do it. They'll get on the treadmill and walk and listen to videos. It's a great thing to do. Some people I tell people like that you can also do the listening while you're doing cleaning around your house. You're trying to clean up your house, do the dishes, cook, put something on and listen. There's a lot of great nursing podcasts. I've heard great things about that A+ nursing podcast, but there's a ton of them. There's tons of YouTube videos, other things like that you can listen to as well. And then it's, instead of thinking like, because sometimes it's like, I used to want to separate. I'm like, this is my work day. This is a school day. I had to start realizing that every day had to be like some bit of studying, like even if it's just a little bit, like I said, even if it's 10 minutes, you're given something to kind of bring that stuff together. So, instead of looking like, oh my God, how can I fit in 4 more hours? Or how I've seen some students when they wrote out those schedules, they're like, oh yeah, I study till 2 or 3 in the morning, and then they have to wake up super early. Like it's just not very conducive to retaining that stuff. So just little study sessions, little things, and we'll talk soon about like the different methods of studying. But yes, just kind of keep that in mind, or consider that there's always like little moments that you can try to take, even if it's for short periods of time. If you have to wait in those, long lines for picking up your kids, bringing your textbook or something along with you, or listening to something, or something along those flashcards, things like that too. Some of this stuff, it's really hard to like just talk about openly. Like, I'm sure there's things I'm forgetting. So you're always welcome to comment here or email me if there's a specific like situation or instance you want to tell me about, and I can try to help you find like a workaround or a way to make it work. So if the problem is you're not motivated, that can be very difficult. And this can be a hard barrier to overcome if it's just really like, I'm just not motivated. But I think what I had to do to set myself up was, some people, I think these days people are creating a lot of those vision boards, or like trying to create like what's going to help to set me up to get me prepared for the future. Like, what am I working towards? But if you're not a vision board person, you can also, I found it helpful for me to have like an image in my head of what I'm striving for. So I still do this to today. Like when I'm going through something that's really rough, I just imagine, a good outcome. And I also imagine the direction that I'm going in, like what is my goal. So like, for example, with my new job, I got a new job and I love teaching to death, but like literally to my own death, where like I love it too much and I was killing myself, and I really need a better work-life balance. And so even though I would much rather be teaching, I know that it's what I need to do for my health. And so sometimes when like, even though like I'm very excited about this new job and I know it's going to be great, if I'm not feeling 100% motivated, where I'm like, oh, I'm motivated to do this job, that's okay. Or I'm not very motivated. And I don't want to say it like that, because I am motivated to do the job, but sometimes when it's not, like I don't have the same push as like I had with teaching and stuff like that, or like I think when I'm, a lot of times it's not even that I'm not motivated, there's like fear there. Like sometimes I'm fearful of, doing well in a new job, and if like, am I going to be good at it? That kind of stuff. And so if I'm having trouble finding the motivation to like study or get in on some of the stuff I need to do, then what I do is I really focus on like, what's my end goal. And so like for me recently, what I've been doing is just imagining like the peace that I'm going to have, that I can go to a job, do a good job, enjoy it, and then come home and relax, have hobbies, have things back in my life again, have my health improve. And so same with you, you can think about your family watching you walk across that stage, getting to practice as a nurse, getting to do all that cool stuff. And so, when you're not feeling motivated, remember what your why is what I always tell students. So focusing on that why. So the next one is, I do not know how to study or get overwhelmed. Well, hopefully the next section will talk all about that, and that will make you feel a lot better. But if you don't know how to study, then it's just about finding out what your deficits are in those areas. If you get overwhelmed easy, I think it helps to break it up in chunks. So like, for example, like with me, I got this big book on trauma stuff and I started to read it, but I was like kind of flipping through it. I was like, oh my God, this is a lot of, this is a lot of information. So then I'm like, I just have one section. So like each day I'm just like, okay, not each day, but like every day I study, I just open it and I'm like, okay, this is the chunk that I have today. It's called chunking. It's where you take bigger things and break them into smaller chunks. So I think doing the same with nursing helps. So instead of being like, oh my God, I've got the paper for one class, I got to get my clinical assignments done, I got to get these assignments done for this other thing, that it's just sitting there and be like, okay, what's in front of my two eyes? What's the next thing I absolutely need to do or get done? So just kind of putting it up in little chunks. Like right now, I just need to get done 25 EAQs or questions or something like that. All right, that's the next thing I need to do. So then it's like chunking helps when you get overwhelmed, but I also think like some stress relieving things can help too. And this is the same with motivation. Setting up, like I have a really, I moved and I have this really nice study space now that is all for me. I have what do you call it? You can do like scented candles, or I have one of those aromatherapy things that's stress relief. I have pictures around of things that motivate me and get me like wanting to get into the work and stuff like that, of my why. It's a very calming space and has comfortable seating, things like that can help a lot of the times. Sometimes also with motivation or getting overwhelmed, having someone to study with, or like, like accountability people or partners in crime in nursing school can help as well. So the people that maybe do not do well with schedules, routines, or if their schedule's unpredictable, I understand. I'm very much a type A person where I need to know like ahead of time, what am I doing? Like what's going on? I have flexibility there. I don't have to have my whole day mapped out, but I like to have a general idea of what I want to get done. And I thrive off that. I was that person who would, like, when I was in nursing school, I was turning in things way ahead of time versus like late. So, I understand though, there's people out there that like to live life on the wild side. They like to wait till the last minute. They need that, like it's due tomorrow. So I get that. So there's some of that you might need to look at that might need to change. Like, okay, like maybe I need to wait a little bit longer than what other people are waiting, but it does not work to wait to the last week. Assignments, I'm not talking about assignments. I'm talking about for test studying and things like that. So it's maybe instead of like having like a set schedule where you're like, oh my God, I have to do this, or I'm going to do like some people, they don't really like that. I want to get 10 questions done every day, or I want to do this, versus saying like, hey, I'm going to just thinking ahead of time. Hey, maybe I'll get some questions done tomorrow. Maybe I'll read this one chapter. Maybe I'll take some notes, like just a general. And if that is even too much, what might help is to create a list of all the things that you can do. And then even if you don't plan ahead of time, just always go to that list, and I'll have a list actually a couple slides ahead that talks all about all the different ways to study, and then just pick and choose. You're in the moment. What are you feeling like doing or trying to study? So you don't have to have a schedule routine, but I have found that students that don't have even a general, like, I'm going to try to study at this time, then that time comes and it's just so easy to be like, maybe later, So if you have it scheduled, if you have it like, kind of in your mind, this is the time I'm going to do this, I think it helps. If you have an unpredictable schedule, your schedule changes, then I think, again, kind of like what I said, having a list of things like, oh, I have a couple hours now. Here's my list of things I can do. What could I do right now to be productive? All right. So now let's go into methods of studying. So the first thing was all about studying schedule. Now let's talk about methods of studying. The questions to ask yourself for methods of studying is, how are you studying? Are you using a variety of resources? Are you mainly just doing like one thing or one or two things that you're really comfortable with? Some students only read the textbooks and do practice questions. And for some classes, that's enough. But for many, it's not. Do you just do what's comfortable, or do you try new methods of studying? So kind of goes back to what I just said, sometimes you do what you've done before. Like when I went into nursing school, I thought I was going to study how I studied for A&P and microbiology, but those are knowledge classes. They're not application classes. And so I had to really look at how I was studying and what I was doing and how it didn't really apply as much as I wanted it to, because, taking notes and studying a textbook is what I knew, but to have to get into this world of application was completely out of my comfort zone. You want to ask yourself, how do you test your knowledge? So what do you think is a good measure of testing your knowledge? We're going to talk a lot about this. I have a whole slide on it, but you want to look at what am I doing to see if I know it? Because I know a lot of students that they study, but they never do anything to see how do I know that I know this information? Do you have a plan or a schedule for studying? Like I was talking about before, sometimes if you're just kind of hoping for the best and, just kind of like a buffet style, just picking and choosing and just, saying, well, we'll see how this goes, without any sort of, thought behind it, it can sometimes end up a little chaotic, or again, sometimes that studying can keep getting put off. Because I get it, like, I made this video maybe like a week ago or something, like, maybe I don't know, if it was something like that, maybe a couple days a week ago. And every day I've talked about recording this video, but unless I sat down and I actually, I got home from dropping my son off at school this morning and I was like, maybe I'll take a nap. I was like, no, do the video. And so it's so easy though to fall into old hard habits. And then are you studying alone or with others? I am an introvert. As much I sound like an extrovert, but I am a huge introvert. Like I could spend the rest of my life by myself and be perfectly content. But when it comes to nursing school and studying, power in numbers does make a big difference. So I would highly suggest finding someone you can tolerate, even if it's virtually. And like, it doesn't mean that you have to study with them every time you study, because schedules are hard. But even if you just meet with them one time before the exam, it can make a difference. And we'll talk more about that. So my general recommendations when it comes to your method of studying is use a variety of resources or modalities. That's going to be what's most helpful. You want to try, trying different things and doing a variety of things. I don't mean you need to use all of the resources I mentioned, but I say 4 to 6 here, but even 3 to 5, 2 to 4, whatever, just trying at least a handful of things. And know that, at least where I taught, there was like some units that one resource would have been really helpful and other units where others would have been more helpful. And so, when it comes down to it, you also have to be flexible. Like we can get kind of used to stuff. Like some people are like, oh, I love flashcards, and flashcards are really great for certain things, which I think I'm going to talk about in a minute here. They're great for studying certain topics, but they're not always necessarily applicable for everything. So sometimes I see students trying to use the same resource for everything, but then there's some units that are more med heavy and need something a little different. There's some units that are more about the disease processes. There's some that are more abstract, and you have to kind of get out of your comfort zone and try new things. And there's some that you're going to feel more comfortable with, and like, maybe you don't need as much, but other ones, hey, I need to watch more videos or do something more to really understand this. Like I just talked about that, you may need to use different tools for different classes, or sometimes like, I hear this all the time, is like students will struggle in a class and then by the end of it, they're like, I finally figured out what I need to do. And they'll be so excited. And then it's like, well, now it's time to go to the next class. And then they're like, now I got to figure it out all over again. So it's so fun, but it's like in nursing school, they're all a little different. Learn your resources. So I think students are really usually focused on like learning information or feeling like they have to know everything, versus really nursing school is about learning your resources and finding people that when you hear them talk, like it just clicks or makes sense to you. Find things that are going to be helpful to you, free websites and other nursing resources. There's a ton of stuff out there. Practice questions are not always the best way to test your knowledge. So a lot of people, when I ask them how they're testing their knowledge, they say they're doing practice questions. I've done tons of test counselings where people are like, man, I did tons of practice questions. I was getting them right. So I don't get it. But just recognizing that your practice questions are probably going to be different, like then your exam may be different, the way they're written and other stuff. And there's different fidelity. If you're just sitting in your house clicking through practice questions and you're seeing the rationale after each question, it's different than sitting in a quiet, stressful space, taking an exam that's going to determine your success in nursing school. It's different. So there's a lot of factors there. What we can talk a little bit about that a little later. We'll talk to more about how should you test your knowledge if practice questions are not the best. I have a whole slide over it. So try to create little goals for yourself to study or get things completed in a day. So like, for example, when I decided like I really wanted to take a nap, but luckily I had a phone call. So I was like, I got to stay awake for the phone call. And then I was like, okay, I'm up. And so I had a handful of things. I needed to write some letters of recommendation. I needed to answer some emails. I needed to do some stuff for my son. I needed to do some stuff for selling a house. Like there's all this stuff in my head that's going on. But instead of me being like, oh, like, so all of a sudden I was like, right now I'm just going to answer emails. And so like I just went through and caught up on emails and, you know, one thing at a time. So I find like, again, it's kind of like that chunking or creating little goals. So I'm not sitting here like in my head, my mind's like, you need to get 50 things done in a day, because my mind is always churning and saying there's something more I need to do, but just little goals for yourself. It helps. And even just like, what do I need to do in the next 30 minutes or the next hour? And then trying to listen, hear, interact with others, even if it's just once. So like, even if this is like you do an after class study session, you go to a study group, you study one-on-one with someone else, something like that, but just hearing other people talk about it, doing, and I think I have a whole slide over how to study with others. I could be lying. If not, I'll come back and talk about this. Let's see. Oh yeah, I do have a whole slide over what to do during study group. So this is just a slide to talk about all the different ways to study. Now there is more than this, but some of the basic ones are reading, like reading your textbook. There's supplementary resources and sites. There's a ton of them out there. I always tell people to go for what is free first and then go for things that you have to pay for, because there's so many things out there. And yeah, some of the paid ones have some really worthwhile resources, but you can end up, I've seen some students spend crazy amounts of money, and it's, you know, start with the free stuff first. If that's not enough, then look into the paid stuff. Writing stuff out, so that'd be taking notes, concept maps. I have also here reprocessing your notes, which means going back in and simplifying your notes. I don't think I've made a video on this yet, but I'll have to do it sometime in the future, where I just talk about how you reprocess notes. Making the most of your clinical. So when you're in clinical, trying to like take patients that are close to what you're learning about, ask questions, see what you can find out. Hopefully there is some connection or correlation there, and applying things there, seeing how it's in actual practice will help with the application. Watching videos, people find really helpful. And again, a lot of them you can just listen to them or watch them. They said that increases your learning by a huge percentage if you watch videos related to things visually, see it. Case studies are super helpful. We talked about study group, making your own questions. So this means, I don't mean straight up knowledge questions like what is metformin ? I'm talking about more application level questions, making those for your own and seeing if you can do it. Because if you can write your own question, you don't only know what the right answer is, you know what the wrong answers are. And that's really high level. And you'll also have a new appreciation for your professors, because it's harder to write those than what they look. Concept mapping, which that's another thing I should probably make a video one day about, is just how to concept map, write things out. Practicing teaching and that's really talking it out with someone else. Like I'm probably going to start having videos on trauma. Now my new job does not require me to create videos, and I'm not a huge fan of making videos themselves, but I find a lot of growth when I teach other people topics, and who knows, maybe it's helpful to someone. And I always create things just to see, hey, if it's helpful. I don't know if it is, but if it is, cool. So, and same, you don't know how you might help someone in nursing school. One of the ways I survived is I had my best friend in nursing school. Him and I would go and we'd stay in the library all night. Now he was always a last minute studier. I studied a little bit more ahead of time. And so I would always teach him, and he did really well from learning from me. And then I did really well teaching him, and it helped to reinforce what I was learning. So finding kind of a similar situation, or even two people that you can teach back and forth. Drawing it out, visualizing it, highlighting things, organizing it. Because really nursing school is just taking a bunch of information and reorganizing and reprocessing it and making it simple. So let me give you a for instance. The other day I was reading through my trauma book, and I was reading about, like, there's the ABCDEs of like the primary assessment. Like if a trauma patient comes in, you start with their airway and you stabilize their C-spine, all that stuff, their breathing, their circulation, et cetera. And so when I was going through this book, I started to take notes. They were kind of disorganized, but by the time I got to like the B or I want to say it was on the B or the C letters, then I started to notice that every single section had assessments, and it had problems, that things that could go wrong, and then helpful intervention. So then I started to organize my notes. So I kind of had all these chaotic notes, and then I went back and I was like, okay, here's the assessments. I try to like group it, almost like make a table. Here's assessments, here's problems, here's interventions. And so it helped me to break it down. Like when I can organize it in my brain, it helps to understand and to learn it. But also when I'm trying to spit it back out, I have more of a visual of it in my head because of the way I organized it. And it also keeps it more organized in my brain. So when it comes out, like however you studied, if you study and your notes are all over the place and not organized, when you're on a test, like all these random thoughts are going to be flying out of your head. Now, it doesn't need to be perfectly organized in your head. There's no way to do that because we're not inside our head, sitting here like, let me organize it this way. But the more that you can organize the information as you're studying it, the more organized it will be in your brain. And then practice questions, of course. So getting into that, I was talking about how, practice questions are okay and they're helpful. I'm not saying don't use them. They are probably one of the top resources that you should be using. You just want to use them the right way. So most people, when they're doing, it looks like I have a whole slide over this, but I'll just say this, is most people, when they're doing practice questions, is they're focusing on quantity over quality. And so a lot of times people don't really know how to do practice questions, but I have a couple suggestions on the next slide of how to do those more effectively to make sure that you're doing them in a way that's going to best support you. Case studies are a pretty good way, because it's anytime you get into open-ended questions or deeper questions or something with a scenario, it's going to help you, because that's what nursing school and especially what NCLEX is. It's setting you up. Here's a patient. Here's what's going on. What are you going to do? It's a lot less knowledge and a lot more application. Open-ended questions are pretty good too. So if you're doing a group or by yourself, coming up with some open-ended questions for yourself, and trying to see, like, even just going through a disease process and being like, what is it? Who gets it? How am I going to know a patient has this, like diagnostics labs wise? And then like, what am I expecting symptoms wise? What am I not expecting, or be a sign of a problem? If there is a problem, what am I going to do about it? What are some medical treatments? What am I going to do as the nurse to help this patient? Like those kind of questions, those are really good open-ended questions. And then, like I said, teaching is one of the best ways to know if you know something, because a lot of times as I'm talking about something, if I'm just feel like, because I can tell when I'm BSing my way through something, I'm like, okay, I need to study this a little bit deeper. And always try to do all of these things, like testing your knowledge, without notes. And then, like, if you need to, have a piece of paper by you and just write down, like, hey, here's the things I need to look back over or go back over because I didn't know what I was doing. All right, so now let's talk about how to do good quality practice questions. So how do you add more quality to your practice questions? You need to take time while you have it, because while you're practicing, that's the whole point of practice, to really break down the question and find a process that works. So a lot of times when I work with students, like let's say that we're going over like all these things, like I said, how are you studying? How are you studying? What's your schedule like? Then I'm looking at how they answer questions. And a lot of times once I see, you can start to notice patterns if you start to break down. It really helps to do it with like someone who's like myself or, your professors, because they can help maybe point out if you can't see it, but really take time to see how you're looking at questions. And so for instance, what that is, like for a select all that apply, a lot of people struggle with select all that apply questions. And I find that one thing that can help, not for everybody, but that can help is that a lot of people do select all that apply. They read the question, then they read all of the choices. So they're looking at it like one big thing, versus I find if you look at it that way, then your mind starts playing that well, it has to be at least two, not this many, that's too many. Oh, it can't be just two, it has to be at least three. And your mind starts playing all these tricks versus looking at it like, let's say there's 5 choices. Those are 5 different questions. There's the question at the top, and then you just say true or false for each one. If you look at it like separate questions versus looking at it like one, it can completely change how you approach those because you're not playing those mind games, those tricks with yourself. You're not looking at it as one big question. So really like break down the question. Like, so what I mean by that is you read the question, maybe it's only taken one video. I think of like 3 other videos, and I've actually thought of a couple in my head that I didn't say out loud that I could make, because I could go on forever. I love student success, but I might have to make a video about, how to do good quality questions, practice questions, but I've been thinking about that one for a while. So you might see something. I need to start writing these down or I'm going to forget all these ideas, but maybe they'll come back eventually. Anyway, so, but when I say take time, I mean, you're going to sit there, read the question and say, what is this really asking me? Like, what is this question really trying to ask me? And then look at each answer choice. And like sometimes, what I've seen students do is they look at a question, they get the right answer, read the rationale, go to the next one. But what's really helpful is to look at the wrong answers. Why are they wrong? And a lot of times a wrong answer is actually right for something else you need to know. Like, so for example, maybe you have a question on pneumonia, but one of the wrong answers is actually about influenza. Now, the question's not about influenza, but you need to know about that too, so it can help to reinforce your study for multiple topics. A lot of times too, I think it's helpful to look at the other answers and see what would have to change for them to be a right answer. So like maybe you're looking at an answer and it's saying, hey, put their head of bed 90 degrees. And you'd be like, that's wrong. But if it said 30 degrees, it would be right, because you're reinforcing more information. So really, like I'm saying, like study these questions, look at the wording, think of the strategies you're using. And again, I know this seems like it's going to take a lot of time, but it actually doesn't take that much time. And especially once you start getting it, like it comes to you over and over. And then also like talk out, don't just read the rationale, because sometimes they can be like lengthy and then you're reading again and eventually stuff starts falling out your head. Say out loud why the answer is right. You always want to know that why, because sometimes students are like, well, I know the other answers are wrong, and okay, that will get you so far, but you also want to know why it's right. And so make sure that you really understand that why. I'm not talking about deep patho level, but just a basic, why is this the correct answer? So overall, like just, really trying to take some time with these questions versus feeling like, hey, if I do 1,000, it's better. Because I've seen students that do thousands of practice questions and do great. I've also seen students do thousands of practice questions and still fail. So it's not about the quantity, it's about the quality, and making sure you're kind of making good use of the other parts of the question, not just trying to get them done. All right, so let's also talk about things to do during a study group. So sometimes, like, people are like, hey, I'm even studying in a group. You said that was going to help, and it really didn't. Well, you always want to make sure that you're studying in a group well, and that you're making good use of your time. Because I've also had study groups before where we just have too much fun, so we can't focus. So things that you can do is that you can split up topics and teach each other. Now, one caveat I'll say here is that I've seen students do this. I had this group of students come to my office once that they're like, hey, we want you to quiz us. So there's like 4 or 5 of them. And so I turned to one and I asked them a question. And they were like, oh, well, that's blah, blah, blah's topic. I can't tell you about that. So it's like they each intensely studied their topic, but they were expecting the other people just to give them everything they need to know. You still have to study this stuff yourself. It's great to study all of it, but then each pick a topic and teach each other. But you need to make sure you still give effort. Just hearing another person talk about it, it's helpful, but it's not enough. So like, in other words, you want to make sure that you're not relying on someone else. Like I've seen students where they'll take the objectives or they'll take the reading and they all split it up and then they come teach each other, which sometimes, depending on the students, that can work, but a lot of times that means you're only studying one part of what you need to know and relying on someone else to give you everything you need to know. And there's just something about that hands-on. And I'm not saying you have to read every page of the textbook, because I have a whole thing on this. You don't have to do that, but you need to own the topics yourself too. But taking, like, if you have done the reading and, engrossed yourself in the information, then you're just splitting the topics up and getting to focus and practice teaching this. I would especially recommend pick the topic that you don't know well. Like don't pick the one that you're like, oh, I understand this one great. Well, okay, well then you're pretty good. Pick the one that you're like, oh God, I hope that there's not a question about this one because I don't get it. Because the more that you reinforce what you struggle with, the better off you'll be. You can play games together. There's fun games that you can make, like matching things, open-ended questions, trivia, Kahoots, Quizlets. You can do practice questions together. You could do them together, or like I have here, you could do them separate and then come back later and discuss them together. Do concept maps and teach each other, help each other fill them in. You could do brain dumps together and try to make a concept map or figure out what you both know together. Remember, though, most tests are not group tests. So, if you're doing stuff together, just make sure that one person's not carrying all the weight. Quiz each other, like the open-ended questions, like I talked about, and then watching videos together and taking notes and seeing what, because it's really interesting in like one class, like every class I used to give this thing at the end of my class, the ticket to exit, where I'd be like, okay, what's one thing you learned and what's one thing you still want to know? And I was so surprised, like under the what's one thing you learned, like different people just really like honed in on different information. So just kind of keeping in mind that, different people are going to, process things and deal with things differently. And so you really want to, working with others really helps you. Like something you might have been like, oh yeah, I didn't really think about that, or I wasn't really focused on that, might help you to be like, oh wow, like, that was really helpful to hear that someone else was focused on that. So did I go over all of it? Yeah. Okay. So potential problems. There's too many resources. I don't know which one to use. So this is where, it's, I think, kind of finding some basics. And like, if I had, I'm not saying this is the end all be all, but what I normally did when I studied was I did reading, watching videos. I did I'm a big writer. Like I love writing and like organizing notes. Concept maps. And that kind of goes with the writing, concept maps. And I like a good flashcard or case study. So like those are the main ones that I used. I didn't really, and then I did the teaching thing near the end. But you're going to find the ones that work for you. And it depends on where you're at and what class you're in and stuff like that. But you don't need to go crazy, and you don't have to. I didn't use all of those for everything. Like sometimes for one section, it's like the big diseases, I did concept maps. The meds, I did flashcards. The ones I didn't understand, I went back and watched videos. Like, so it's not feeling like, it doesn't need to be methodical where you're like, I have to watch every video on every disease process. Like sometimes it's good to hone in. Like if you're in class, you get something, you don't need to do every resource for it. Put your energy on the things you don't understand. I have trouble focusing. We talked a lot about like setting up an environment that's going to help you focus, breaking things down, like trouble focusing. If I've been doing something for too long, like by the end, like I'm already starting to feel it, or I'm like, is this video almost over? Because I love helping you guys, but like after a while, I'm like, I'm ready to take a nap. If you have trouble focusing and stuff like that, it's breaking things up into chunks and taking breaks when needed. But if you're one of those people that will manipulate the long break, gotta keep that in mind. And then, maybe setting up little rewards or things for yourself too. But whatever's going to help you. I find sometimes when I really need to focus, certain music can be very focusing for me too. And like I said, my little stress relieving thing, I'm actually going to turn it on now. Oh, wrong thing, that's the light. Let's see, let me get my color back on. Okay, this will be my little brain break. All right, there you go. Anyway, so I do not like people, do not know how to find a study group. Yeah, I don't like people either, but I love you guys. But I love you because you're students, and I really just have a heart for the struggles and stuff that you go through. But in general, most people are the worst. I'm just joking. They're not that bad, but I would just much rather be by myself. So I get it. Or it's always nerve wracking. Like I have students that came up to me like every semester that they're like, oh, I need to find someone to study with. And so you could ask your professor and see if they know of any study groups or can help you get connected. But you'd be surprised. I think the best way to connect with people if you're shy is to ask in your clinical, if there's anyone who's looking for a partner, just kind of make some connections in clinical because you get to spend more time with people. And just remember, if nothing else, this is your education. So it sucks. It's no fun having to talk to strangers and do these things, but it's going to be worth it if you get through nursing school. So, sometimes these little things. Again, you don't have to spend every moment with these people. You don't have to be best friends with them. You just need to share information, work through stuff, even if it's just an hour before not an hour before the exam, but like 1 hour at some point before the exam. I have a lot of negative self-talk or feel like a failure. I know this all too well. And I know that it's easy to think that professors, like, we must like feel really good about ourselves and have a lot of self-confidence and be very smart. And I'm sure there's a lot of professors that does apply to. But for myself, I've always struggled with a poor self-image and just not liked myself. I've always had every reason to like myself. I've had people say wonderful things about me, and I have a lot of people that love and care for me, but that sometimes just doesn't feel like enough. I still sometimes feel like I need to be doing more or better. And so, yeah, I mean, what helps me most is that I'm doing things to care for myself. And it's not like a lot of people do the positive affirmations, things like that. But I never really found a lot of help with that. A lot of people did. And there's a lot of really cool strategies. I had a patient once tell one of my students to write in the mirror in lipstick on their mirror, "You are the best person I know." And like they flew with that. That was so helpful for them. For me, I'm a little cynical and a little dark humor, trauma bound, or trauma bond. Yeah, trauma bonded through life. So needless to say, the positive self-talk, I think it's very helpful. And if that works for you, please do it. What I had to do was really work on doing activities that were like making time for myself to do activities that make me feel calm and peaceful. So I do a lot of meditation. Like I said, the aromatherapy and stuff like that. I do a lot of baths, for relaxing baths, especially after stressful things. And sometimes I do get into the, I have to change the story. So like if the story in my head is I'm a failure, no one likes me, I'm not good enough, it's just about saying like, okay, well, there's lots of evidence that proves that that's not true. And trying to move forward with that. Cause I'll tell you, I was really on the fence about applying for the new job and leaving teaching because teaching is my home, it's my heart. But I knew my health was declining and I needed to change. And then I saw the job pop up, the one that I got. And when I actually saw it a while back and I was like, no, I'm not smart enough for this job. Like I can't apply. They were going to just laugh me away. And so when I was really surprised when I applied for it that I heard back, because I was like, oh my God. And then I went to the interview and they told me that they really were interested and were invested in me. It blew me away because I was like, me? I just didn't get it. And so I tried to use moments like that to remember I am worthy, I have something to add. And, I always think in my head, what people want, for example, for this new job, I thought they would want someone who's smarter than me, who's more well experienced in trauma, who's someone who would have a little bit different of a personality. I'm a jokester and stuff like that. And I said in the job interview something along the lines of one of my strengths is my sense of humor. And I thought after I was like, man, that's not a strength. But what they told me is later is that was one of the most important things I said, that sense of humor is really important to them. And so in other words, what I'm trying to tell you is I don't know what people want or need or what people see me like. If you wrote out a list of how you see me, if you know me, and then I wrote a list of how I see me, it would look very different because I don't perceive the world right. So in other words, what I'm telling you is you can't trust your mind. Your mind is usually wrong. I know you were saying well, how am I supposed to take tests? That's a whole other issue. But you can't trust your own minds when it comes to how you see yourself, because 9 times out of 10 for most people that have this issue, you're not seeing things clearly. You don't know your strength. You don't know your worth. And so sometimes, even if I can't get into that, you're great, I love you, mind, and I'm not making fun of people, but it's just I can't get into it. It just doesn't work for me. What I have to do is just be all I say is maybe I'm wrong. What's the biggest thing I'm going to lose if I'm wrong here? And so when you're sitting there and you're getting like in your head and you're like, oh my God, like, especially if you've had multiple failures, you might be feeling down and be like, oh man, there's no way that I'm going to do okay on this test. But then it's just sitting there and just being like, what if it actually went differently? Like, what if I'm actually studying perfectly? Because I know sometimes when you're really stressed out and you're like, am I studying the right way? Am I studying enough? Or what if I don't pass? That like your mind convinces you that you're wasting your time and here you go again. But like sometimes it's just doing some meditation, try not to follow that thought and imagining what if it actually is going to be completely different. So same like with this job, I'm really nervous about starting. I don't know about how it's going to go, but I know that it's probably going to go better than what my head is telling me it's going to go. And so it's not that I don't have to be Miss Uber positive, but I need to believe in the possibility that I actually just don't know, that maybe I just don't know about myself. I don't know about my own strengths. I don't know about my own worth. And that there's a possibility that it could actually go well. And that when I step out of the way and my mind gets out of the way, things always go better. So I want to do what I like to study. So this is what I hear a lot is that I'll have someone come to my office that, they've been failing their test, and then they talk to me about what they do, and I tell them about some things that maybe they can improve on. They're like, yeah, but I don't really like to do that, or I don't want to do that. So, nursing school is meant to be uncomfortable. And a lot of times, there's been many times in my job where I've had to do things that I'm like, oh, like I remember working in the ICU, there was time that they brought me a mom who had just had, or maybe she was still pregnant, and she was going into like, I want to say it was a preeclampsia. I want to say it was that. And I had to do deep tendon reflexes on her. I've never done that. I've never had a patient on a magnesium drip. I was so uncomfortable and I felt like, oh my God, I'm going to fail this person. But, I had to use my tools and my resources and learn, or there's been times that, before I had my son, they asked me to like help a mom, pump. And I had no idea how to do that. And she was like intubated, and I was sitting there and like trying to help her. I was like, what do I do with this? And so, but you learn these things. And so, sometimes it's about getting out of that comfort zone where you learn the most. And again, kind of going back to, we don't always know what's best for us or what we need. And if we're like, it's kind of like that, what do they say? Like insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So sometimes you have to try something different. And even though like you may say like I hear people be like, oh yeah, no, I've tried studying with people, it doesn't work. Well, maybe you haven't found the right study group, or maybe you didn't try some of the things like I mentioned. So don't be afraid to try it again under different circumstances. Or, like even like I said before, I used to think like, working in public would never work for me. I get too distracted. It didn't in the past, but now it does. So you just never know. Like, what I say is just keep an open mind can be one of the most important things as you're getting into this. Language barrier can be really hard. There is software out there that can help, because I definitely, there's research that shows that, like that one of the biggest barriers to success in nursing school for people that do have English as a second language is that language barrier, and that it can be really difficult. So like having good reading comprehension is really helpful. And that's why practicing reading questions, have a dictionary with you while you're doing it, and start to learn common words, even if you need to write them down. Also, when you're taking notes and stuff, try to write them in your own words. Make sure you're learning important terminology, but try to translate things as you're studying it into words you're more comfortable with, so that way you understand it, but while you still know the terms that you need to term. So, because terms that you need to know for the test. So what I mean by that is like you take the notes and you maybe highlight like terms and stuff that you see over and over, especially if you're like doing practice questions and you're saying, oh yeah, hey, there's a lot on this. A lot of like the same word use. Like I need to know what this word means. But then when you're looking at your notes, you want to understand it at a heart level, like where you feel like you can truly like break it down for yourself. And so that really helps to kind of put it, like I even say like using analogies and metaphors, even if language is not a barrier for you, but like just medical lingo is just complicated. Like there was one time I was studying meds with someone, and what helped them to remember some meds was like, hey, this is like a beer I drink at home. Okay, if that helps you to remember it, cool, do it. So it's whatever helps you to remember the information. You want to make it yours and personalized. I do not feel like I'm learning no matter what I do. Well, the good news I have here is they actually say that the less you feel like you're learning, probably the more you're learning. Because sometimes it's like those moments where you feel like you're learning nothing that you're actually learning the most. So if you're feeling that way, congratulations, you might actually be learning. And so it's not to say like that that's always true, but majority of the time you're learning more than you realize. It's just a lot of information. If you're getting really overwhelmed, again, then just make sure you're chunking and not doing too much at one time, and you're breaking up into smaller study sessions. Last but not least, test taking issues. So I have a whole other video on this. So, but I'm going to tell you some just basic stuff. You know, the questions to ask yourself: how do you feel after taking a test? You want to ask yourself, do you feel like you should have done better? Like, hey, I thought I really aced this thing. Or do you feel more like, as soon as I got to that first question, I was like, no, I'm done. I'm a goner. Because a lot of times is it a knowledge problem or is it a test taking problem? If you feel like you did really well, like you knew the stuff, but you got the answers wrong, it might be a test taking issue. Whereas if you got on the test and you had no clue what any of the answers were, it could be test anxiety, or it could also be that you didn't study enough or study the right information or study the right way. Do you feel like you understand the questions you are reading? So like you want to think about that language barrier like I talked about, or your reading abilities. Do you really understand what the question's trying to get at? Because like sometimes when we interpret a question, like I'll read a question with the student and they'll be like, oh yeah, like, well, this is like, I was like, what is this question asking you? And they're like adding in all this story and other stuff. And like, no, just what is it asking you? Like, just keep it simple. And it's really hard. You have to practice that. Do you use strategy at all when using test taking, or at all when test taking, or just knowledge? Like, do you go in and say like, well, it like for example, some questions, like two of the answers will be the same thing, but they'll be worded a little different. And those, if there's only one right answer, those can't be right because they're both the same thing. So you can kind of cross those off. Do you usually think most of your nursing school exams are just full of tricks? Now, it's okay if you feel this way. You're not going to offend me. I was never offended, even when I was a professor, by this thought. So it seems like, oh man, like there's all these tricks. Like, yeah, it seems like it. I swear it's not. It just seems like it. But a lot of times when you feel that way, it's test taking strategy. And we just need to work and look at how you're looking at them. Because they seem tricky, but there's a way to approach them. Do you get full-blown panic or anxiety attacks before, during, after testing? That might just be a sign of some stuff to work on. I actually have a whole video on test taking anxiety and things like that, if you want to watch that. Like I said, there's a lot here, so I can't just give like a lot of suggestions, but just know that you need some strategy, but also need to know the content. It has to be a balance. If you have a language barrier present, you need to practice reading and reword things in a way that you can understand. And again, have that dictionary there while you can. And practice putting things in your own words. Practice testing. So this is what I was talking about before, is like you want to create a testing environment that's actually like it. Because if you're sitting at home casually doing questions, you're playing music, you're relaxing, you're taking breaks, getting on TikTok in between, like, I mean, that's not a normal testing scenario. So you don't feel the same angst. So I think doing tests in test mode versus what do you call it? Doing them in study mode where you get the rationales. Test mode, like 70 questions back to back. Make your house really cool, or put a fan on you, make some loud, scary noise, or have scary music in the background, deprive yourself of water, all the things that we do during exams for you guys. Whatever your exam situation is, create that environment the best that you can, and practice it. It's like running a marathon. Like, you don't just get up one day and say, hey, I'm going to run a marathon. You have to, train and stuff for it. Mental health strategies, there's a lot of good habits that you want to have. Taking care of yourself, like I said, making sure you have time for you. I think it's great to have time that's nothing involved with nursing, like nothing about your job, or becoming a nurse, spending time with family, remembering your why, prayer, meditation, whatever, all that stuff helps you, aromatherapies, stress relieving techniques, massage, things like that, whatever works for you. Movement and exercise is really good too. I talk about this. I have a test taking strategy, a test anxiety and mental health stuff video under my study strategies video playlist. And it talks a lot about the hour or so before the exam. Do not cram and study up until the last minute. Get up, walk around. The more you can like get the blood flow into your brain before an exam, the better off you'll be. And then doing practice questions with your professor. Like, I've had so many students that say like, oh, I just didn't feel like that was your responsibility, or I felt like I was bothering you. And I'm not saying that all professors are open, and not all professors are going to be willing to do this. But if you have a professor that's willing to help take you through, like, hey, can we look at some questions together and see where I might be going wrong? They can help you find your deficit more than anyone else can, especially if they're very open and willing. But I'm always here to help too. You can always send me a message if there's something I can help with, or if you get a practice question that you're like, I just don't get it. How would you approach this question? Always here to help. Where am I? Okay, there we go. So general reminders, make sure to stay hydrated and eat. If you're not hydrated and don't eat before an exam, it can block your learning or block your studying. Try to avoid, apparently I'm a nerd because I can't say avoid. All right. Try to avoid technology while studying. Now, this is a hard one, but I actually have there's, what is it called? There's this app that I have, what's it called? Forest, that you open it and you can block notifications. And if you set a time, sometimes it'll be 60 minutes or something like that, you can set less. And it's just this is how long I want to be productive and not be on my phone. And if you don't get into your phone or try to do anything during that time, a tree will grow. And then before you know it, you can grow a whole forest. And so a lot of people find it very relaxing and oh, I want to do this. So you can definitely check that out if you want to, or I'm sure there's other ones. But the more you there's nothing wrong with taking breaks, but the more you interrupt with technology, or if you're studying, but checking your text messages incessantly, it's not very focused. So it does help. And studies show that the more you're on your phone while you're studying, if you're in class and you're on your phone constantly, the less that you're learning. I know it's a struggle because I do it without even thinking about it. And, but yeah, definitely it's a good habit to start working on. It's not saying you can't have your phone at all ever, but just, maybe trying to block off some time where you can really focus. Know it's okay to be uncomfortable or not feel like you're learning. Usually in the most discomfort is where you're having the most growth, which sucks. It's why can't growth be fun and just exciting and exhilarating? It has to feel uncomfortable. So find what works for you. So I'm sitting here talking about this. And if you ask any nursing student, we all want to help each other out. We all want to survive this. And so you ask any professor, they're all going to have different advice, but find what works for you. Find what supports you and what you want to do for moving forward in your you're learning. And so sometimes you might talk to someone and they're like, oh, you have to use this resource, or you have to do this. And some people, they're like, nah, I just didn't really find it helpful. And that's okay too. Find what works for you. Make sure to get outside and have non-nursing time, get some sunlight on you. Again, some time where you're not thinking about nursing, you're not studying, you're not even thinking about nursing school. You're just focusing that there's a world outside nursing school. Make sure to sleep, because I've seen a lot of students that are studying all the right ways, but they're getting so little sleep that they cannot bring it together. Remember, that's where that's the time your brain organizes everything and puts it together. And don't be afraid to ask for help. I see so many students that struggle for a long time and come when they're about to fail and it's too late, versus getting that help early. Because, that's what we're here to help. And other students, they want to help too. I think you'd be surprised at how nice people can be sometimes. So other general tips, this is the last slide. Thanks for hanging in here if you're still in here for this one. Try to do some pre-reading or watching before class to kind of cinch some things together. You want to go to class and prepared in a way, you don't have to have everything memorized, but you want to have a foundation. Even if you just know what is the disease process you're going to talk about just on a basic level, something like that, just the basics will help, so you can really focus on getting in those details versus trying to learn everything while in class. The point of going to class, it might have in other classes been to teach you everything. We cannot teach you everything in class in nursing school. We would love to, but we don't have the time, and you definitely don't have the brain, I was gonna say bandwidth, but it really should be brainwidth, to learn everything in that class time. Come to class with one question from the pre-reading or watching something before class, and try to answer it for yourself. So in other words, think of one question that you're oh, I didn't really understand this, and see if you can answer it yourself. If not, go up to your professor and ask after class. It's okay just to listen and take gentle notes. I've had people in my class that just color because it helps them to focus. Instead of getting on their phones and stuff, they're just coloring and listening. Some people have notes printed out and they just take little notes on the side. But I think just know that like everyone's different again, but sometimes writing notes down while the professor's talking, it's too hard to keep up. And you're thinking about what you're writing versus what your professor's saying and really trying to understand it. Participate in activities. I had a student once who claimed that like they put on my evaluation that because I made them do interactive work or work with other people, that sometimes they drove to my class without wearing their seatbelt. Which I think was their way of saying that they wanted to die because I made them do interactive work or work with others. But so much fun, so little time, but a little dramatic if you ask me, but I really don't do that much and it was not that bad. But participate, make the most of it, because as much, again, I'm not a social person. I hated group work too. I get it. But it's your education, it's your opportunity and chance. We don't do this just to piss you off or upset you or make your day harder. We do this to help you. We really know that it helps and it's shown that it helps. So just make the most of it. Be okay with, like, I mean, I'm okay with being on these videos and sounding like a fool half the time. And, because I know it helps people, and it helps me too. It helps me to learn and grow as well. So, don't be afraid to be a little silly sometimes. Write questions or put question marks on your notes for things that you need to review. So in other words, like highlight or mark things that you're like, I don't really get this. Let me go watch a video on this later. And even if you're doing notes at home, do the same thing. Like you don't have to necessarily stop in the middle of your studying and be like, I gotta go watch a video. You can, but you can also just mark, what do I need to go back and review? Try to focus on the big picture. So don't memorize. It just doesn't work. Something gets lost. If you don't really understand why, if you just memorize, hey, for this patient, we do this, but you don't know why we do, whatever the treatment or nursing intervention is, most of the time you need to know the true why for it, for why we're doing it as a nurse, how it helps. Do not stare at your notes constantly. So some students are like, I'm going to just look over my notes over and over. You're not really learning anything at that point. There is a way to go back through them. And again, this is a different video, different time. There is a way to go back through them and kind of like highlight or like break down, reorganize your notes. That's helpful, but just reading them over and over is not helpful. So don't just read, memorize. It's about taking it, reprocessing it, making a table out of it, making a concept map out of it, highlighting what's important, really just making it new instead of just trying to read it over and over and understand it on a deeper level. After class, make your notes simple. So if you had like 4 hours worth of notes, try to break it down in something that's more manageable. Put information into application, like be like, okay, so I'm going to, like, let's say it's for like an asthma patient, I'm going to teach them about how to use an inhaler. Okay, well, let's say that, I had a patient that, I was teaching about an inhaler, like what would they say that I would know I need to teach them some more. So like you're trying to apply it to situations. Do a brain dump. And what a brain dump is like where you get a piece of paper, no notes, and you just say, okay, what do I know about like whatever topic? So we were just talking about asthma. So what do I know about asthma? Put everything down, and then compare it to your notes and see what you're missing. You still need to study. So in other words, again, study what you don't know, not what you already know. It's a great way to know what you know is a brain dump. Focus on the nursing aspect. So, every school is a little bit different, but most nursing schools, we focus on the nursing process and application, not so much the patho. So make sure that you're not getting too deep into the patho and getting distracted from the bigger picture. Videos and visualization are key. So like seeing it, especially drawing it out, organizing it in new ways, organize it in your brain. I think doing 10 to 15 practice questions daily is good. It doesn't matter. Sorry, I have a little thing. I'm not farting. It's my little, like a fidget toy thing. 10 to 15 practice questions helps. It doesn't really matter. Like people said, what are the best practice questions? It's really just about looking at the information. Doing good application questions is always helpful, but it just depends on what you have access to. And I have I have some questions on my Google Drive, which are pretty good. Some of them are better than others, but it just depends. Application questions are always better. And then, like I mentioned before, use the free stuff first and then start buying things if needed. And, from talking for this last hour and 20 minutes or however long it's been, I still see a lot more things I could add. There's so much around student success in nursing, but hopefully this gets you started and gets you some information you might need to help move you forward and be super, super successful in nursing school. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I'm always here to help. I hope this was helpful, and it's always a pleasure to see you guys. Bye.